In 1989, a Soviet admiral walked into a meeting with a Pepsi executive and handed over 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. Not as a joke, not as a stunt, as payment for soda. For one brief, absolutely insane moment in history, PepsiCo controlled a naval fleet larger than most sovereign nations on Earth. Your history teacher never mentioned that. Your economics professor skipped right over it. And the reason this story got buried is almost as wild as the story itself. Let us go back to where this started, because the seeds of this madness were planted in 1959. That year, a World's Fair called the American National Exhibition opened in Moscow. It was the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a competition that touched everything: science, space, sports, and apparently, carbonated beverages. Richard Nixon, then Vice President of the United States, was there. So was Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. The two men ended up in a famous argument in the middle of a model American kitchen. History called it the kitchen debate. What history usually forgets to mention is what happened right after it. A Pepsi executive named Donald Kendall had specifically arranged to have a Pepsi booth at that exhibition. He had worked directly with Nixon to make sure Khrushchev got a cup of Pepsi in his hand, in front of cameras, in front of the world. It worked. The photos ran everywhere. Khrushchev, the face of Soviet communism, drinking an American soft drink. It was a propaganda coup that Coca-Cola still has nightmares about. But here is where the real deal got complicated. Pepsi wanted to sell in the Soviet Union. The Soviets were interested. There was just one problem. The Soviet ruble had no value on international markets. You could not convert it into dollars. So how do you pay for the syrup? The answer they landed on in 1972, when Kendall formalized the deal, was barter. The Soviets would pay Pepsi not in currency but in Stolichnaya vodka. Pepsi would get exclusive rights to distribute Stolichnaya in the United States. In exchange, Pepsi would provide cola concentrate to the Soviet Union. They literally traded vodka for Pepsi. The deal ran for years, and it was genuinely working. Then the 1980s arrived, and the vodka arrangement collapsed. American consumers started boycotting Russian products after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Stolichnaya sales tanked. Pepsi's payment stream dried up. But the Soviets still wanted Pepsi, badly. So both sides had to get creative. This is where it gets completely unhinged. By 1989, the Soviet Union was crumbling economically. Mikhail Gorbachev was trying to hold things together. The Soviets had military hardware they could not maintain and could not sell easily on the open market. What they did have was ships. A lot of ships. So Pepsi's negotiators, led by a man named Yuri Dubinin on the Soviet side, hammered out a new agreement. The Soviets would hand over a fleet of decommissioned naval vessels. Pepsi would sell them to a Swedish company for scrap. The scrap value would offset the cost of the Pepsi concentrate going into the Soviet market. The fleet included 1 cruiser, 1 frigate, 1 destroyer, and 17 submarines. All transferred. All to a soda company. When Donald Kendall reported back to American national security officials, he reportedly joked, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." That line is funny. It is also a little chilling when you sit with it. If this kind of buried history is what you came here for, subscribe right now. We cover the stories that mainstream education decided were too strange, too inconvenient, or too complicated to teach you. Now here is the layer underneath this story that almost nobody talks about. Pepsi did not just stumble into this arrangement. Donald Kendall had been deliberately cultivating relationships inside the Soviet government since that 1959 exhibition. He understood something that most American executives in the Cold War era completely missed. The way to operate inside the Soviet system was to make yourself indispensable to the people at the top. Kendall became one of the most connected Western businessmen in Soviet history. He used that access not just for profit but as a genuine back channel during some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. There are historians who argue that Pepsi's presence in the Soviet Union created a small but real thread of economic interdependence. That thread complicated the logic of military confrontation. When you are selling 100 million cases of soda inside a country, you have a reason to want that country to stay stable. Coca-Cola, by contrast, aligned with the Olympics boycott in 1980. They chose the ideological lane. Pepsi chose the transactional lane. And for 30 years, Pepsi had a monopoly on the entire Soviet market because of it. The ships were scrapped by 1990. The Soviet Union itself collapsed in 1991. And when the newly independent Russian market opened up, Coca-Cola flooded in with massive investment. Within a decade they had overtaken Pepsi in Russia. The back channel was no longer necessary. The indispensability was gone. But for one moment, one genuinely extraordinary moment in 1989, a soft drink company was a naval power. A corporation sat at the intersection of Cold War geopolitics, barter economics, and superpower decline in a way that no business school case study has ever fully captured. This story matters today because it tells you something real about how power actually works. It does not always look like missiles and treaties. Sometimes it looks like a cup of soda handed to the right man in a Moscow kitchen in 1959. Sometimes the most consequential deals in history happen not between generals but between executives who understood that the other side just wanted something cold to drink. The world is full of stories like this one. Deals made in rooms history forgot to enter. Arrangements that shaped nations but never made the textbooks. If you want more of them, you know what to do. Subscribe. Because the history they taught you was the outline. We are here to fill in everything they left out.